Imagine, a podcast series by Imagine Theatre.
Yes, hello again and welcome to episode 83 of this series. And this time we're going to do something rather different. We're going to reminisce and remember a man who had an incredible career in music, variety and pantomime.
For more information, go to their website at www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.
In the last episode I was joined by the musical director, arranger and composer Miles Russell. Don't worry though if you missed that or any of the other previous episodes, because they are all still available. So far we've talked with celebrities and backstage team members, practitioners and academics about how pantomime is produced, its history and its future. So make sure you check them all out where you normally get your podcasts from, and don't forget to subscribe to the series so that you don't miss any future episodes. Well, this time I've been joined by a very proud daughter from her home in the Canary Islands, as we remember her dad, a man who had an incredible career as a musical director in music, variety and of course pantomime. He shared his name with his eldest son, who became a familiar voice on Radio Caroline in the late 60s and BBC Radio 1 in the 1970s. His name was Paul Burnett and his daughter is Caroline, or Kaz, who joins me now. Kaz, first of all, how are you?
I'm fine, Martin, thank you.
So tell us a little bit about your family background, first of all. What do you remember as a child about your dad and his job?
As a child, it was nothing new to me because it's just what my dad did. So I have great memories of sitting in the pit with my dad. I was allowed to turn the music page when he nodded his head, which was sort of how I started to learn how to read music. My mum was in the business as well. They met when they were doing a show, and apparently my dad walked past my mother having a fitting and just said, "I'm going to marry that woman," and he did.
So do you remember going to see pantomime as a child?
Yes, lots, because my brother was quite nervous and I wasn't as a child, and I was quite cute. So quite often I was a bit of a stooge. So if they couldn't get a child up to play along with the kids that went up on stage, they'd plant me, knowing that I would give some sort of good response and get a goodie bag, which I was quite upset I usually had to give back again at the end.
So basically you must have gone up for any number of song sheets at the end of a show then?
I knew them all. Probably still do.
So where would this have been? Was this in Coventry?
We started, I was born, as my brother was, who was a couple of years older than me, in Blackpool. My parents both did summer seasons and pantomimes in Blackpool, and we moved from there probably when I was about 5, because my dad was offered a lot of work at the Coventry Theatre, which is now not there, I don't think anymore. I think it's been knocked down. So we did a lot of work there, probably about 7 years. He did panto there, but summer seasons we ended up traipsing back up to Blackpool again, and then after that moved to Bournemouth, where he did a lot of pantomimes there. So we all moved back there as well. But I mean, pantomime was just, it started a lot later. I think, as far as my memory serves me, it would start around like the day before Christmas, not a couple of weeks before, but it went on, especially when I was very little, it went on for well into February, possibly March.
Yeah, well, of course, some of those shows will have gone on to Easter and beyond in the early days, so it's quite conceivable that your dad would have MD'd a panto and then gone pretty much straight into summer season.
It was pretty much in summer season, which again was incredibly long, and it was great for us because we got to leave school at least a week before it opened and went back a week later. But yeah, there wasn't much of a gap between pantomime and summer season.
This timescale for your dad would have been 1950s onwards, really. Do you know how he got started in the business in the first place?
Yeah, he had piano lessons as a child, and because, well, he was born in 1919, I was born when he was 50, it was very late. So he learned piano and he taught himself accordion, and he was in an accordion band when he was about 14. And then when he was called up for World War II, instead of cigarette rations, he would swap his cigarette rations for manuscript paper and taught himself arranging and composing. And then got in, and quite early he got in with Delfonts, as most people know, are huge.
Yeah.
sort of self-taught, which is extraordinary to be a conductor and pianist and MD and everything else that he did.
But effectively, he became Bernard Delfont's go-to MD, didn't he?
Yes, very much so. I also did quite a lot of, I think he did at least 3, because I've got 3 programmes, but I think he probably did a few more Royal Varieties. He was the MD to Ruby Murray. He went out to South Africa with Ruby Murray in the 50s. Dickie Henderson, he was his MD. They flew all over the world to do gigs. Often my mum got brought along, which was very nice for her. We didn't.
But I guess as well, you didn't appreciate all the incredible people that he was working with, did you?
No, I didn't have a clue who they were. Just, if I was allowed into their dressing rooms, that was good. And that was because the Stars dressing room sometimes had a television. That was my big thing, if I could watch TV. But my dad was very strict, you know. You didn't go to anyone's dressing room unless you were asked. You sat quietly. But I loved being in the pit with my dad. I thought that was the best thing ever. I felt like part of the team.
So you mentioned Dickie Henderson and Ruby Murray, but you didn't mention Morcambe and Wise.
The only time I remember meeting Morcambe and Wise was when one of them said to me, sit in the corner and be quiet, and I thought they were serious. So that's what I did, but apparently it was a joke. But my mum was their stooge for quite a lot. I've got some lovely pictures of her in the North Pier. Yeah, they worked together quite closely, and my mum was a dancer and a singer, and she was their stooge.
As you got older, when did you start to realise just what an incredible career your dad was having or had had?
I don't know if I did until quite late, because it was just so normal for me. I think I've learned more how incredible he was from hearing from other people who said how wonderful he was to work with and how he never made them feel embarrassed or uncomfortable. And there were definitely musicians who were a bit green, or singers who were a bit green, and my dad was never one to put anyone down. He would work with people and just wanted the show to be the best show. I never had a temper, but he did have a temper, but he would more likely lose his temper with the people above than the people below him.
And when you went to see those pantos as a child, and even when you went up for the song sheet, did you have a favourite pantomime story, one that you really enjoyed, like a Cinderella or Aladdin?
Of the typical ones, Cinderella, because I just think it's archetypal. I liked Aladdin as well, but I really liked Emu in Pantoland, which was just weird, but it was fantastic. I just remember every night watching him come down in the balloon with Emu, and I wasn't allowed in his dressing room because I didn't know at the time he had, spoiler alert, he had 8 emus in the dressing room.
Tell us about this one then. This is an interesting one, because we've spoken on the podcast before about pantos that have come and gone, that are no longer staged anymore, but this was unique, this one, wasn't it?
I think it really was. I think probably because Rothal and Emu were such a sort of superpower at the time. And as far as I don't really remember a lot about it. I think it was sort of a conglomeration of lots of panto stories just involving Emu. But I just remember it being great. I think we had the Waltzing Waters, which I was allowed to operate at some points.
And where was this?
Later on, I had to operate them, and that wasn't so much fun because I had to sit there through the entire show to operate the Waltzing Waters at the end of Act 1.
So which theatre was this?
This was at the Coventry Theatre.
Do you remember Christmases? Because your dad would have been working up to Christmas Eve and Boxing Day onwards. Were Christmases different?
Yeah, we had Christmas Day was off, and I still have audio tapes of my dad going, "Oh, I've only been in bed for a few hours. Here's the kids opening their presents. Right, let me go to bed." But no, my dad was an incredibly vibrant man. Considering, like I say, I was born when he was 50. And I never, ever thought of my dad as being older than other people's dads. I suppose I didn't see him a lot because obviously in the mornings he'd be asleep and I'd be at school. And then when I got back from school, he'd be going out. And then Sundays, we weren't a religious family, but I know Roger and I, my brother, we were enrolled in Sunday school, and I can only think it's because my parents possibly wanted a little bit of time to themselves.
So what about your school friends? Did they know who your dad was working with? Were they excited to hear stories about, Morcambe and Wise or whoever?
I don't think at school I don't know if they really knew. I don't think children really talk about what their dads do. I probably didn't name drop because I didn't really know quite how famous they were. I think I got asked a lot for autographs for Rod Hull and Emu. But I think more parents would have been more interested than kids. And it was just, I was brought up with it, so I didn't really know any different. I mean, when we were in the summer one year, we used to have this awful tiny caravan, 2-berth caravan, which we stayed in for, 3 or 4 months, which my mum hated, of course, but we all loved it. Mm-hmm. But on the same campsite, there was the guy that played R2-D2, and there was a lot of circus people around as well. So for a kid, it was sort of a bit like living in the famous Five, looking back now, but at the time I didn't know any different, so it was just my normal life.
And just talking about the Royal Variety performances, I mean, they were literally all-star shows. Were you able to go and see those?
The names are just extraordinary. Gene Pitney, I think the Beatles were in one, and Matt Monro. But no, we didn't live in London, so no, I wasn't allowed to go because I had school in the morning.
And some of them, if not all of them, would have been shown live on TV, would they?
I don't really know a lot about it. I mean, I'm looking at one now, which was 1966, and that was Frankie Howerd, Matt Monro, Jerry Lewis, Henry Mancini, Tommy Steele. But I think my parents kept us very grounded anyway. We weren't allowed time off school, well, unless it was the first week or the last week of school, because my dad couldn't cook. So if my mum wasn't with him, he'd probably have starved.
So tell us a little bit about you, because you went into the business, didn't you?
I always just assumed that I would just be in it. I don't think it was something I wanted to do. I thought I'd be an actress, and then I realised I suffered terribly from nerves. I got into drama school and realised I hated being on stage. Absolutely hated it. But really liked bossing people around, so stage management was the way for me to go. And I met someone called Ian Dickens, who was to become a very good friend, still is a very good friend, and he gave me my first job as an ASM, and I did my first job. Actually, the first day I went to the wrong theatre, so that wasn't a good start. I worked on a different pantomime for half a day before they realised I wasn't in the right place. But after, I did that, and then I worked just sort of old school, really. I don't think you get it anymore. I started off as an ASM, then a DSM, and then a CSM. But I've always had my dad's work ethic, and he's always said, I know it's a bit trite, but be nice to the people you meet on the way up, because you'll meet them again coming down. And never expect anyone to do anything that you aren't prepared to do yourself. And so I worked in theatre in the UK, touring for probably about 20 years, and I loved every minute of it.
So how many pantomimes would you have worked on then over the years?
See, that's weird, because I don't do pantomime. I think I've done 2, maybe 3, but I was always touring plays Agatha Christie and all sorts of things like that. But they were very long tours, 28 to 36 weeks. So at Christmas, I was like, I don't want to do a panto. Much as I love it, I'd rather go and see one.
Having said that, you mentioned Ian Dickens. I think he, in recent years, has actually, and you may have been involved, produced some pantos in Spain, hasn't he?
There was one in Spain, but in Spain, everything's incredibly complicated. So although I think it was amazing to actually get it on, I don't think we'd try it again.
Yeah, who was it aimed at? Was it expat Brits abroad, or was it aimed at a Spanish audience?
Expat Brits abroad, of which there are many. The cast were fantastic, we've got everybody over, but the physicalities and the logistics of anything in Spain are incredibly difficult.
you said that obviously you lived in Coventry for a while, but then you moved to Bournemouth, I think, didn't you, as well, where there would have been both pantos and summer seasons, probably.
We moved to Well, it seemed everywhere we moved, it was generally Delfont saying, "We want you here," so we'd move house, and then so we moved to Bournemouth and did about one summer season there, and then they shipped my dad back up doing summer season and pantos back in Blackpool. So we spent a lot of time commuting from place to place. And my dad also commuted quite a lot. He did the Paul Daniels show, which I think is maybe still the longest running show. It was the Paul Daniels show at the Prince of Wales Theatre. And I think that was about 14 to 16 months. So my dad commuted every day from Bournemouth to London.
One thing I would say about your dad is that there's hardly anything that anybody can find about his incredible career. Have you been able to do any research yourself?
Only sort of what I know. Nobody's really asked. I mean, I've got programmes and there's a great Facebook site called... There's quite a few really good variety Facebook sites, and quite often people put pictures of posters up, and I'm like, oh yeah, there's my dad. Usually people like the Three Monarchs and some wonderful variety acts, which seems to have died now, which is a shame.
So have you learnt anything in later life about your dad's career that you didn't know, or do you appreciate it more now than you did as a kid?
No, I think I just appreciate it more. I mean, as a child, it doesn't really matter whether your dad works at a post office or a bank or in the theatre. For me, it was just normal. And because my half-brother was a DJ and my older brother was doing a lot of acting and then became an agent, and my mum was a dancer, even though before that there's nothing in our family. I think my dad's parents were publicans, probably were. My dad never drank, and my mum's dad, I think, had a corner shop, but I might have made that up. So there was no theatre in our background. But once Roger and I were born, everybody seemed to be into it. So for me, it was just as normal as someone saying, well, my dad works in a bank, so I work in a bank. It was sort of theatre is where I feel most at home.
And we spoke about your mum as well, because she had an incredible career as well, although obviously things changed when you and your brother were born.
Yeah, she trained at Romba which is why she changed her name from Barbara, because there were too many Barbaras, so she was told to call herself Sally. No, she gave up a lot because she wanted... You can't both be working as in the theatre as parents, so yeah, she once my brother was born, she took the chance to look after us and to look after my dad, because, like I say, he couldn't cook. When my brother was filming, I was in the caravan with him, and I swear we lived off... Well, it was great for me as a kid. There were 3 weeks when all I ate were chips and scones and jam and cream.
So
Although he did make fish fingers once, but they were still frozen on the inside and black on the outside. So
You said previously that you're so proud of both your parents, but when you look back, what do you think you're most proud about?
their work ethic and how they treated other people. My dad was never too busy for anyone, and neither was my mum. They were both incredibly generous, kind-hearted people who loved life, loved music, and just loved each other. I mean, there wasn't a day. When my dad used to go away on tour, before my mum could join him, he would leave a love letter for each day that he was away, even if it was only 3 words. It'd be in the bread bin or in the cupboard. And yeah, they sacrificed a lot for us to go to a good school, but no, they were just kind people, always very kind and very generous with their time and their talent. Yeah, I have a lot to live up to.
And with regards to the programmes and so on, have you found any other memorabilia, things like bits of costume or props or anything like that your dad or your mum had knocking around?
No, I have a baton that my dad said... I mean, the batons he used were cheap. It's just basically a bit of plastic and a bit of cork. And someone broke one, and he said, oh my God, I'll never get that back. So they went out and bought him this incredibly elaborate, very expensive ebony and ivory engraved baton, which was far too heavy for him to use. So I still have that. I have some of my dad's medals from, the medals you get just for being in the war. But yeah, I have an ashtray that he got when he went to South Africa, and with, loads of really famous people for a golf thing, and he just went along to play for the concert. So I have things like that. I have some of his sheet music. So yeah, I have a few things that are worth anything, but they're worth a lot to me. He loved every moment of it, and so did my mum. And yeah, they're quite an inspirational couple.
Nowadays, do you go and see panto at all? Is panto anything that you have been involved with in any other way, or is it something you've just left behind now?
No, I mean, I'd love to, but because I'm a resident of Spain, I think it's quite problematic for people to employ people that, especially after Brexit. We always had problems before when we had to employ people if they weren't a resident of the UK, and because I'm not a resident of the UK, it can be quite difficult for people to employ someone that isn't. So, no, I'd love to. And people say, why don't you get involved with the amateurs, which I have thought about, but I think I'd be quite... I think I'd be a bit too strict, because I think I expect them not to have jobs and to actually work 10 hours a day. Even though there's some fantastic amateur societies, but, they all have other jobs as well, and I'm not sure whether I'd be very good.
Do you have an abiding memory of panto, or what stands out to you about why panto is so special or important?
I love a slosh scene, or some breaking plates, anything with noise and children. I love the bit before it starts, and usually a couple of days before everything seems to go wrong, and you're thinking, this will never ever happen. It's impossible now. Nothing will come together, and then somehow it always does. And probably the first curtain call of any panto, I just think, because everybody's just like, oh God, we've done it. Which, I mean, especially nowadays when the rehearsal period is so short. I did a panto, and the smoke machine just burst, and there was oil everywhere, so I had to pull in a cloth, and I just said to the turn, just give me 5 minutes, and he just looked terrified. He said, 5 minutes of what? I said, well, I don't know, that's your job. But because he was a fairly new person to the business, and it was TV, you're not asked to vamp till ready or fill. I'm a bit of I'm not terribly a massive fan of having the massive names in, especially when they're from a reality show, because they don't have the stamina and the basics in performing. But there's still some amazing traditional shows, and anything that gets children interested in theatre from day dot, I don't think you can go wrong.
I think as well, the interesting thing about your dad, certainly during the 1950s, when variety was at its peak, really, very often they would have very little rehearsal time, but the acts would come in, they'd have a meeting, and they would discuss amongst themselves, right, you do your routine here, then I'll do this routine. So there was little rehearsal, really, but they all just knew what each other were doing.
Well, especially, like you say, with variety, because it was just, you got your spot, and you had to work it to however many minutes you'd got. So it was sort of seamless, and as I said, my dad could always vamp till ready in any key you wanted. Yeah, the summer seasons were fantastic, and seeing people come up from when they were just getting their foot in the door, it was lovely. I had a fantastic childhood, a really blessed childhood.
Who was your favourite dame? Did you have one?
Billy Dainty was extraordinary. He was one of my favourites. Arthur Askey, now I'm showing my age. I didn't know who he was, but John Inman was superb. Peter Butterworth, which I don't know if he did many, but Peter Butterworth was absolutely lovely. A lot of pathos, but just beautiful. But I think Billy Dainty probably my favourite, because he would always do that, when Billy Dainty did the ballet dancing, that was always in it.
He was influenced by people like Nat Jackley, who was...
very much so.
But the walk and everything that he did, similar to Max Wall in some ways, but the balloon ballet was legendary, wasn't it?
It was, and that sort of thing. And I think that should be in there again now, because kids don't care. For them, it's just magical. I think it's always better if they don't know who the people are, because then the sense of magic is still there for them.
If they can relate to the characters and they can have fun, they enjoy the slapstick, they enjoy getting involved, shouting, booing and so on, they absolutely love it, don't they?
It's the amount of noise that you're allowed to make as a child, I think, is extraordinary.
It's absolutely fabulous to pay tribute to your dad because, like I said, there's very little said about him, certainly on the internet, and he had such an incredible career and did so many amazing things. It's been fascinating chatting to you, Caroline. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. And honestly, my dad was never particularly a man that would to court, that he never went to openings and things like that. He was quite a private man, but he certainly loved the business, and it's lovely of you to invite me to talk about him.
And that brings another episode to an end, I'm afraid. Next time we're going to continue our occasional series looking at one of the most popular pantomime titles, and this time we're concentrating on Mother Goose, with Imagine's joint CEO Steve Bowden and the Senior Curator of Modern and Contemporary Performance at the Victoria and Albert Museum, Curator of the National Database of Pantomime Performance and founder of National Panto Day, Simon Sladen. So join me, Martin Ballard, next time for episode 84.
Thank you for listening to the latest edition of Just Imagine, the podcast series from Imagine Theatre. And you can find out more by going to www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.